people, welcome back to my show, Pondering That with Saffron King. Today we're with a very, very talented individual, Lakeisha Goedluck. Thank you so much for having us, Lakeisha. Lakeisha is a freelance journalist from London. She has written for several magazines and global brands, including Vogue, GQ, Dazed, Highsnobiety, Refinery 29, ASOS, and Pandora. You are highly, highly experienced and gifted, Lakeisha. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's really an honor to speak to you and be able to be featured. So thank you for having me.
Oh, amazing. So we're just gonna jump straight in, Lakeisha. So when did the spark for journalism arise for you?
I think it was when I was a teenager. So me and my best friend, we used to go to the corner shop after school and buy issues of Dazed and ID magazine with the pocket money we get. We'd get those and then we get a packet, or should I say a pot of Nutella, and then sit in her room and just like flick through the pages and basically eat whatever candy we could find. And I think it was from that point where I was like, this is so cool, especially with those sort of like niche fashion magazines where they're very like up to date and have a finger on the pulse all the time. So I was like, I'd love to be able to be involved in this somehow. And I've always known that visuals are not my strong suit, but in terms of the written element, because I've always read avidly as a child, I think, as most of us would say, I've read all of the Harry Potters, read a lot of Jacqueline Wilson, read all the Meg Cabot books. I was the kid who was like, okay, I'm going to go home after school and I'm going to sit in bed and read until dinner time. So I think it was those two things sort of like crossed over, and I was like, yeah, being a journalist or specifically a fashion journalist would sort
Amazing.
of be my desired path in life.
And how old was you like then? Like what age would you say you were?
I was about 14, I think. Yeah, I was like an early teen. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. So it's good to know that from that age you knew exactly what you wanted to do. I feel like
Yeah.
sometimes we can chop and change in our adulthood of what we want to do, but it's nice that you
Mhm.
stuck to the course. I think that shows a lot of discipline as well and just maturity
Mhm.
from a young age. And look,
Yeah.
yeah, how did you get into journalism and specifically fashion journalism as well?
Yeah. So it wasn't a straightforward linear path. So after my A levels, I did quite well at school, not to toot my own horn, but I think it was that case, especially when you have parents who are people of color and whose parents are immigrants as well, who have sort of moved from one area of the world to another to sort of, open doors for their like children and their children's children. I think there's that pressure, as I imagine you understand, Saffron, where, you
100%.
know, you're like, you have to have a firm career path in mind. It's all about success. And I think my parents were very apprehensive about me studying something that was so like explicitly creative. So we had like a chat and we made a deal. And I said I would study English language and literature at university. So I actually went to the University of Leeds, but for all of like 5 months, because even though the Leeds is great, it's a nice university, it's a nice city. I think I just knew for me it was, it was not opening, or it wouldn't open the doors that I wanted to have opened to be able to get where I wanted to go. Because I was very interested in like the University of the Arts London, so whether that be Central St Martin's or the London College of Fashion. So I dropped out in my first year at Leeds, and I applied the following year to go to the London College of Fashion to do fashion journalism. So yeah, I had an interview there, and then I got one of the places because it's quite a small course. I think there were only like 30 something of us. Just because I knew it was one of those degrees that would sort of allow you to experience the industry hands on. So whilst I was at university, sorry to my tutors, but I was never really there. I was always like interning or working for different magazines that I'm still privileged enough to work with today. So yeah, that was my like way in.
Wow. I think that's really inspirational because, you really, you went out of your comfort zone and from a Caribbean household as well, myself, it is
Yeah.
like, what you're gonna do, like it's quite strict
Mm.
as well, like the pattern, like law or being a doctor or, and there's
Mm.
nothing wrong with those professions at all. But I
No.
feel like not everyone has that passion. And I'm glad that you did something that is making you happy. And look how successful you are now, Lakeisha. Like,
Thank
I'm
you.
sure your
Yeah.
family are very proud of you as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is super nice. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Lakeisha, there's something when I was looking at your work, there was
Mhm.
amongst all of your well-written articles, there's one piece of writing that really stood out to me, and it's what you wrote
Mhm.
on Skin Deep Mag. And
Mhm.
it was about your friend. And I wanted to
Yeah.
ask what made why was it important for you to tell that story about your friend?
Mhm. Just to circle back, I guess, to what you were just saying about, yeah, coming from a Caribbean household,
Mm,
especially being a person of color, like growing up in England. And I know there's obviously like different voices sort of chime into the discourse around racism and how people of color are treated in the country, which is always going to be a fractious topic. But I think having grown up, obviously, as a woman who identifies as a Black woman and having a dad and a brother and uncles and cousins who are Black men,
mm,
and who were once Black boys, I think it was a really important story to tell. Just because it was like my friend, I think I referred to him as Daniel in the story,
yes,
so I'll carry on with
Daniel.
that. Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So yeah, so just like obviously out of respect for his family and for his memory, I just asked if the name could be changed. But yeah, it was just a case of him being sadly one of many, I think, especially growing up and going to the school that I went to, and there were a lot of boys who sadly sort of followed the same fate. And I think there's this unfair bias that it's Black boys, they're just like a different breed, they just go out and cause drama or toxicity, or they're just inherently criminals, which obviously is not true. But I think that discourse exists within our society, and certain members sort of like push that narrative. But it's such a systemic issue, as we all know, in terms of funding. And I wrote a story maybe a year before that for Galdem, which sadly doesn't exist anymore, but a platform for women of color, to sort of share their opinions. And the piece was about loneliness in the UK for Black people. And it was talking about how so many like youth centers or things that we go to after school, like after school care and things like places of community for people to convene, especially those who don't have that level of affluence where they have like a massive home to go home to, are closing down. There's just not the funding for it anymore. So people are sadly falling into lives such as the one that Daniel sort of fell into. And yeah, unfortunately, he's not here anymore to experience the world that we get to experience. So I thought it was sort of my responsibility, not just as his friend, but also as a person of color, but also just as a person in general, to sort of use whatever platform I can to spread that information and to explore or explain a vantage point, I guess, that doesn't get the same airtime as other perspectives.
Absolutely. And it was a beautiful piece as well. And I
Thank
feel
you.
like it's quite emotive. Did it bring up a lot of emotions for you when you were writing it?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not great at sticking to deadlines anyway. Hope no prospective employers will read this or listen to this. Sorry. But
Oh,
I think sometimes when you're a writer, because obviously everyone's heard of writer's block, and sometimes your
yes.
brain just sort of hits a wall. But oftentimes, because I have always, well, I've been freelance full time. Last year I was freelance full time. I have a full time job again now, but I freelance on the side. So I've always had that sort of like two-pronged approach to work. So I think I often obviously do my 9 to 5, and then I come home and I'm like, do I really want to write an article right now? And I think especially when it's like emotionally heavy, it can be difficult to get yourself into a space where you feel that you have what you need to give to the story, because it's not just my own story, because obviously I've written personal pieces as well, but that's like mining my own experiences, where this is my experience, but it's a shared experience with someone who doesn't have the voice to be able to explain or express their perspective anymore. So I wanted to be able to talk about it in a way that was like fair and respectful of his memory and respectful to his family, but also not gloss over anything, or be dishonest in the way that I sort of communicated his life and my experiences with him. Because yeah, there's no point in sort of being a journalist if you won't have the integrity to share the truth. So it was like emotionally hard. And I think I remember I wrote it in summer last year, and because I live in Copenhagen, it gets bright very early. In summer, I think the sun sets, if you can even say it sets, but it gets a bit dark for about 3 hours. And I
Is it dark
remember I
now
had been
or is it light now?
so it's very grey and miserable now
Oh.
because it's the opposite in winter. It's just dark all the time.
Oh.
But in summer it's very bright all the time. So I'd sort of sat at home and I'd sort of procrastinated all day, and then I thought it's quiet because I like to work at night when it's quiet and everyone's sort of gone to bed, so I can't get distracted on Instagram or on WhatsApp or anything. And it must have been about 2 a.m. and then I just wrote, I think, for like a couple of hours, and then sort of slept on it and reread it in the morning, and then sort of brushed up on edits and things. But yeah, it was I think I remember crying when I had written it because it's happened quite a long time ago. But obviously whenever you revisit a memory, it sort of unlocks those experiences again. So yeah, and the
Absolutely.
memories attached to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and because you're writing it, you're having to tap back into it like it was like you're talking about it now, like it's happened now.
Mm,
So
exactly.
that's why I thought, emotions would definitely come. What
Mhm.
has been your most favorite article to write, or any type of writing piece? What has been your
Mhm.
favorite thing to write?
That's such a difficult question. I
Or
think
one of
because I've written,
one of them.
yeah, you're
Yeah,
like, be warned.
yeah, I
I'm like, who's
know.
the journalist now? But I think perhaps I love writing fashion show reviews. I think because I've done it for such a long time, and also because there's the experience attached to it in terms of being able to go to an event, watch something that is over in about 15 minutes, but being able to like have your brain very switched on and be very immersed in a situation is also a great experience. And then I have to sort of pull on all of the techniques and the tools that I've learned over the years to be able to explain and express myself, because obviously show reviews aren't very long either, so it's being able to be concise, being able to give the audience an impression of a show that they can't perhaps get from what they see on social media, being able to provide context and like flavoring up your writing with like historical information or like cult references, and being able to do that because basically I get about 2 hours after every show ends to be able to send the copy across, so it's very fast paced. So I think being able to sort of like delve or deep dive into things like that is fun. But I also really enjoyed last year when I was working on the Men of the Year issue for GQ, because the GQ team are so lovely, and I haven't worked as part of an editorial team because obviously as a freelancer, usually I'm like commissioned to write on an article by article basis. But this time around, I was like a freelance member of the team for a portion of about 3 or 4 months. Um, and obviously working on a distinct issue. It was so cool to see your work sort of get artworked and become an actual physical thing, and be able to have copies of a magazine. And I think because I got to interview Black Coffee, who's like a world-renowned DJ, and also Malcolm Camilete, who's like a lovely actor. He's in Champion, which is on the BBC
Oh,
right now, but was also Renell, yeah, in Top
yeah.
Boy. And they were both such lovely men. And it was again that thing of being able to be like, oh, I get to talk to these like accomplished Black men who have sort of paved the way for other people of color, but especially for that demographic, to show that yeah, the sky's sort of the limit. And I know obviously there are certain hurdles that we have that other people who are not people of color don't have in the same way, but the fact that they are sort of like pioneers, sorry, and like role models and leading the charge, it was so nice to have those like very open, transparent conversations with them and get into their creative processes. And they were both very humble, like very sweet men. So to be able to even have the honor of being able to, yeah, I guess immortalize their careers in that way by contributing to that issue of the magazine was, yeah, it was such a nice experience.
Amazing.
Very humbling. Yeah.
And what was your process like when you were interviewing them? Like
Mm.
how did you have to prepare for the interview?
Yeah. I feel like I need to learn from you at this rate.
Oh, no, no, no. I'm learning from you.
But I think for the most part, it's a case of me sort of looking into their careers. So with Malcolm, obviously, it was a case of, all right, he's in this new TV show. This is sort of going to be the crux of the story. I have to watch the show. I've already seen Top Boy, but I was like, let me just rewatch a few episodes to sort of gain that context again, read up on what he's been doing. I try not to read too many other interviews because I think you can almost get yourself stuck in terms of almost like accidentally plagiarizing if
Yes.
you're like sampling from someone else's work and then you're like,
Yeah.
whoops, did I say that or did they say that? And then with Black Coffee, because obviously he's a musician, it was more so listening to his work, seeing who he's collaborated with, and also trying to gain an understanding of where they come from. And yeah, I was looking at their style because obviously I have to think about the fact that it's for a men's sort of like style and grooming magazine. So those elements have to come through as well. So yeah, thinking about their lifestyles, how they dress, that sort of thing as well. So I just sort of come up with a list of questions, but they're never fixed. So I tend to not give anyone a preview of what I'm going to ask them because I feel like it's easier to get more spontaneous answers from people if they sort of go into it blind. And I think a lot of the time with people who are more high profile, they're used to having to do like press interviews and junkets in that way. But I always leave room or leave time, depending on my allotted interview time, to ask questions that are sparked from the conversation itself, because I feel like when you get those organic answers, that's when you really get to the meat of what you're talking about or who that person is.
Absolutely. And even not even to give too much away about our process before we interviewed, is
Yeah.
I asked you if you'd like to see the questions beforehand, and you said no, feel
Yeah.
free to ask me on the
Yeah.
spot. I know some people prefer it, but I know
Yeah.
I realized that when you don't know, it is very organic, it's very spontaneous, and I find it's more raw because you haven't prepared anything,
Yeah.
you know, so
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
genuine with it, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not staged, so I think
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you there. Was there a point, Lakeisha, in your career where you, even though you're very accomplished, even from school, education, did you ever doubt your ability to write, even though you were still getting the good grades and the affirmation? Like when you, and even when you started working, did you, I guess, did you have feelings of imposter syndrome or, yeah.
I think that's something that women grapple with the most, because there's that statistic, isn't there, that it's like, oh, men will see a job ad and they'll have like 20% of the qualifications but apply, but a woman won't apply unless she can feel as if she can do 80% of what the job role asks for. So I think all of us, or the majority of women, I would say, sort of experience imposter syndrome more so than men. I think I've always been like confident in what I can do. And I also think as a writer, you have to be open to criticism and you have to be open to developing yourself or learning, because otherwise your writing style just stays static. I think there's only been one time, which I'm fortunate to say, where I've really felt, yeah, like, oh, maybe I'm not as skilled as I thought I was, or maybe I'm, yeah, not picked the wrong career path for me. But I think it was because I was in a workplace that was quite toxic and I had a boss who sort of got a kick out of, I guess, demeaning other women. And obviously being younger than her and being in a working environment and looking to her or looking at her as my boss and sort of somewhat of a mentor, you just don't really anticipate that that's how someone would treat you. And I remember speaking to my dad's girlfriend at the time, and she sort of explained it in that way. And I was like, oh, I would have never sort of conceived of that as being a sort of power play or a dynamic that someone would want to instigate and profit off of. And then weirdly, one of my friends, I didn't know her at the time, but she then took on the role once I had left that company, and she explained having the same experience and the same dynamic was at play. So it sort of like flashed that light bulb in my head to be like, oh, so I guess it really wasn't me, and this was really just a situation where someone, yeah, was probably had their own insecurities and projected them onto me. But I think that's what's difficult, especially at work, when you're working with people who are more senior than you, or you're entering into a new workspace and trying to like find your footing. I think it's important to like, yeah, be open to criticism where it's constructive, but also you have to believe in your own abilities and also believe in what you can't do as well. If something's beyond your pay grade, I think it's important to be able to speak up and be like, actually, I don't think I'm competent in doing this, or this was not what the role entails. So I can try and do X, Y, Z, but like if you haven't given me that foresight in the beginning, then you can't expect too much of me. But I guess that comes with experience, and it comes with having done a job for a while, that you have the confidence to sort of speak up for yourself. But yeah, I hope that answered your
No,
question.
that's amazing. And I'm sure anyone else who's experiencing, self-doubt or, fear, I think that's a really good shout, because it's important to be able to know that you can speak up for yourself, obviously in a fair
Mm,
way and with respect. But I think sometimes a lot of us, especially us women of color, we sometimes can
mhm.
be a bit afraid to speak up because we're scared to have that
Yeah.
reputation of, oh, that's the loud
Mm,
black girl, or she's the aggressive
yeah.
girl. So you
Hmm.
kind of put a lid on it even more. But
Yeah.
it's very important to know your self-worth and, be confident.
Mm,
Like you said, even being confident in what you don't know,
yeah.
what you're not competent in, because I think
Mm,
honesty is the best policy.
mm,
So even from the interview stage, it's good to be honest, because I've heard of
yeah.
stories where people have lied on their CV or lied in interviews, and
Oh.
in my head, I think that in the end, actually, it doesn't benefit you, the person who's actually lied, because they could be end up getting a role that actually they may not for one, like, or two, they might not have the skill set for. So yeah,
Exactly.
really important.
And then you land yourself in hot water inadvertently.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What would you say is the most fulfilling part about your role, like in fashion journalism and even other types of topics that you've written about? What would you say is the most fulfilling for you?
So it's interesting that you asked me this today. So I recently started dating someone new. And he seems like a really nice guy, but we were talking the other day and I said, oh yeah, I have a website, blah, blah, blah. And he was like, you have a website? And I was like, yes, I have a website. And he's like, so it's like your portfolio? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, well, you can look at it if you want to. So I obviously sort of like left that portion of the conversation. Then he texted me today to say, oh, he'd read one of my articles that I'd written. So I don't know if you've heard of this television show called Made that came out on Netflix like a few years ago.
Yes, is it about that
Um,
black lady who is it self-made? Is it I'm thinking about
yeah.
the hair. Is it about natural hair or hair products?
I
That
think I know which one you're talking
Oh,
about, but because that's
I
what I'm
think
saying. So there are so
self-made.
many TV shows with the same title, yeah. Because
Yeah.
there's a one with I can't remember Margaret. I can't remember what her surname is now, but Andy McDowell's daughter, who's like a fantastic actress, and it's basically an adaptation of a book about a woman who is in an abusive relationship, and she has a young daughter, and she sort of escapes that dynamic to forge a new life for herself. And the way that she manages to do that is by working as a maid and earning money through cleaning, but she obviously isn't getting paid very much. And it sort of goes through the trials and tribulations that she experiences and sort of unpacks that relationship. So I remember watching it, and in terms of my own past, I've been in a couple of situations that have been emotionally abusive, and it sort of just brought those feelings to the fore again. And my friend used to be an editor at Refinery 29. So I pitched an article to her after I'd watched it and was like, I feel like this is such a good show. It really like shed a light on all of these experiences that I've had and really made me feel seen and understood, even though it was somewhat triggering at the same time. But I think it was a cathartic experience to watch it. So she commissioned me to write a piece on it. And then so this guy had read it and was like, oh, we've obviously spoken about some of the things that you mentioned before, but he was like, I had no idea. And it's really like encouraged me to think a bit more. And he was saying like, he's sorry that I've had to experience those things. But I was like, I said to him, it's important for me to write about these issues that affect us, as I said, as people of color or as women, to be able to provide other people who have that experience with a voice. So I have a platform and I'm able to allow people who perhaps don't have the same friendship network or perhaps don't have a family support system to feel like they're not alone. And especially where like domestic abuse is concerned, because it can be so pernicious, and especially when you're a young woman and you don't really have that understanding of what dating is supposed to be like and attachment styles and red and green flags. I think there are only terms that have come into like the discourse recently. Whereas, yeah, when I was younger, it wasn't that was not a thing. I'd be like, "What's a green flag?" Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of women respond. I've written stories in the past as well about, yeah, my first emotionally abusive ex, that I had women DMing me or sending me emails being like, thank you so much for writing that. I feel the exact same, or this is what I've experienced, but I've never been able to put it into words before. I didn't really understand what was happening to me. And I think just the fact that yeah, I can provide people with an opportunity to be like, have a reckoning with themselves, maybe to be like, wow, I that's contextualized what I've experienced, or even to just get an understanding of how certain relationships can operate so that they have tools at their disposal so they can prevent themselves from getting into those scenarios in the first place is also great. I think journalism is such a powerful tool in that way to allow people to, yeah, be like notified and educate themselves, or just, yeah, feel seen and feel understood. So I think that's the most important or the most fulfilling aspect about being a writer, even when it's fun stuff like, I don't know, doing like a silly listicle, like writing about my favorite elements of hip hop. It's still like something that you can really deep dive into, and yeah, take something away from it, I think, or I'd like to hope that my writing does that, where it allows people to learn something that they didn't know before when they started reading.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Lakeisha. Like, and some of it was sensitive information. Thank you. And it's
Of
beautiful to
course.
see that you've turned what you've gone through into like your work, into your art. And because sometimes I think it's so easy to go through certain things and then just not really kind of wanting to give up on life. And I'm not saying that to judge anyone, because sometimes you do need to have that stop and be like, and heal or go to therapy or stop. But I feel like it's beautiful to see that you've really used what you've gone through to not only put it into your art and your work, but also to help others who are going through that. Like, you never know, someone who could have read your work, like they could have been on the brink of giving up completely, but reading that could have given them the hope that they needed. So that is beautiful, really beautiful to hear, Lakeisha. And that's to me, from the outside looking in, that's a very fulfilling feeling. So yeah. And before you go as well, Lakeisha, I was going to ask you about the Copenhagen Fashion Week, because I know you recently
Yeah.
there, because I want to bring that in as well.
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you? And also I'd like to know, how do you know what to write about it and what not to write? So what's relevant and what's not relevant? Yeah.
So Copenhagen Fashion Week, the first time I'd ever been to Copenhagen, I've lived here for 5 years now, but the first time I'd ever come here was for Fashion Week. So back then there were only four of us as international press. So it's obviously massive in comparison now, because I think there's probably like 400 people now rather than four. So it's sort of, yeah, cemented itself on the fashion calendar and become more of a moment, which is great to see, because it generates such a like buzz in the city, as I guess all fashion weeks do, whether it be London, Paris, New York, Milan. But it's so nice to see that sort of energy. And I think Fashion Week also provides a great opportunity for brands to use like historical spaces or like event spaces or restaurants that sort of don't get the same coverage or the same eyes on them. It's such a good way for them to sort of be elevated and brought into the zeitgeist a bit. But yeah, it was really fun. So now, because as I said, I work full time again, I could only do shows in the evening. So it was a case of being like, right, run home from work, eat something, change, back out again. So it was quite hectic. Yeah. But it's the theatrics, I think, and also the opportunity to see a production. And because I've worked for a fashion brand before as a copywriter, I see the other side of how much effort and time and money it takes to put a show together, and the sort of like camaraderie and team spirit that you get from having produced something and having it go well. So I feel like it's also a privilege to be a writer and to be able to, I guess, give people their flowers in a written way. And I think because I've been doing it for so long now, I learned a lot. When I was at university, I did an internship basically at Dazed magazine, and I'm fortunate to still write with them now. But at the time, my boss, Emma Hope Allwood, who's a fantastic journalist, she was the one that gave me the opportunity to come here to Copenhagen. But when I was learning under her, she would always teach me about, looking at the fabrics, looking at the colors, listening to the soundtrack, looking at the setting and how the setting informs what you're watching, trying to bring in cult references, trying to bring in historical fashion references, looking at what's wearable, looking at if it's functional, and also how is it part of a brand's evolution as well. So I sort of have all of those ideas buzzing along in my head, but as the show is going on, I just go in my notes app and I make notes very quickly. And then after the show's over, I then copy and paste those notes into a Google Doc on my phone, and then I just sort of type everything out. But I think that's how I usually try to do it. I try to peg it to something interesting, whether there's like a moment in the show or like a statement piece, or whether because obviously we get press releases through either shortly afterwards or right before the show, so that we get a bit of additional context, or you've been to a show a season before, so you have that reference point in your head already. But I think that's the easiest way for me to sort of like tie it all up, and sum it up together. But yeah, it was great. It was a lot of fun. I partied a lot. I drank too much Belvedere at the Rotate party, but it's fine. I was like, I'm 31 years old now. I can't act like I'm 21 anymore because I had work the next day. But it was great.
Oh,
Good time.
amazing. That sounds
Yeah.
like fun. And you see, when you
Yeah,
work
it's a lot of fun.
hard, and
Yeah.
thank you so much for this, Lakeisha. Like you're a full testament to someone who's really, fought for what they want and also continue to pursue your dream in spite of society's expectations or what you should be doing, So
Yeah.
thank you so much. And where can we
Thank you,
find you?
Saffron.
Oh, and where
Very kind of you.
oh no, like
So
oh, yeah, you're amazing. And where can we find you on social media for like those who like to
yeah.
follow your journey and read your
Yeah.
articles as well?
Yes. So because I am ridiculous and also a writer, there's a rapper called Kilo Quiche, but I just ripped off her username. So mine is also Kilo Quiche, but it's KILOKEESH on Instagram. Otherwise, my website is my full name, just Lakeisha Goedluck, .co.uk, I believe. But yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you so
I
much.
will also put your website and your handles as well so that people can have
Thank you. Yeah,
reference to
because my
it. Yeah.
name's neither name is easy to spell.
Oh, and
Yeah.
you've got a beautiful name. Your parents did
Thank
well
you.
naming you.
Yeah,
Oh,
my tutor at uni was like, "Oh, you've got a name that was meant to be a journalist byline," and I was like, "Thanks, Steve."
Do you know what your name means? Has anyone told you what your name means?
So I've heard that it means the favorite one in Swahili.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting. That,
but
'cause
also has Islamic origins. So
oh,
yeah,
wow.
which means alive and well. Yeah,
Wow, wow.
it's like a yeah. I wrote an article about it, and just because Keisha comes up a lot in pop culture, and I learnt that it was a name that came out of the civil rights movement as a way for Black Americans to sort of reclaim their identity and have names that weren't given to them by slave masters. It was a way of showing Black pride. So yeah, I'm really happy and really proud to have the name that I do have.
No, it's
Yeah.
beautiful because even I've got into a lot of conversations with other Caribbeans as well who say,
Mm-hmm.
I'd because I feel like a lot of I can't say a lot of, but a lot of people who
Mm.
I've met, our surnames, we found that it can come from like a slave. It's a slave
Mm-hmm.
surname. Like so,
Yeah.
I've always wondered what my real surname is. I think I
Mm.
definitely want to do ancestry.com or something
Yeah.
to know
Yeah.
where my true origins are. As far as
Yeah.
I'm Jamaican, but I feel like
Yeah.
no, I'd like to see what else there is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever done ancestry.com before? Have you ever felt to do
No, so I thought about it because I've also written an article once upon a time about my granddad on my mum's side, because other than my grandmother, who has since passed away like 12 years ago now, none of us, even including my mother, has ever met him. And he was like a blonde, blue-eyed, potentially English man. And then my great grandfather was a Chinese man. And then on my dad's side, my grandparents are from Guyana in South America, but on my grandmother's side, her ancestors are Native American. So there's a lot of, yeah, there's a lot of branches, I guess, to my family tree.
Oh,
So I would love to do it to just see,
yeah,
where
absolutely,
you come from. Yeah, which I think
absolutely.
is so interesting and important as people that are part of a diaspora. It's very complex.
I
Yeah.
think it definitely adds to our identity and certain identity
Mm-hmm.
crises that we've experienced in our time in our generation.
Yeah.
I feel like it would definitely soothe a lot of questions. So,
That's a good way to put it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lakeisha.
Awesome.
Thank you all for
Thank you,
listening.
Saffron.
Oh, no, you're amazing. Thank you. And guys, you
That's
can
amazing.
follow us at Ponder on That Podcast on Instagram and also Ponder on That with Saffron King on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and all the audio outlets. So thank you guys. And definitely keep following Lakeisha's journey. Read her articles and yeah, definitely support. She is very talented. And yeah. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye for now.